Welcome back. As we're going through the relentless courage of a scared child, there are just so many issues.
I'm not sure how to take that.
You often say you're a psychiatrist's dream.
No, you often say that. I don't say that. He says that.
And you have been.
At least I'm not a psychiatrist's nightmare.
This psychiatrist's dream. Because you're so strong, but yet that was born out of chaos and stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we talked about the molestation, we talked about losing your voice. And so as you go into adolescence, a whole bunch of things sort of came together from developing early. And, a lot of people don't understand, but as child psychiatrists, when you develop early, it causes all sorts of stress.
Yeah, it did.
And psychological issues. Your mom's chaotic relationships and her problem with the picker. So where do we go?
So, one of the things that I think is, first of all, I want to relate this back to people. The whole reason I wrote this book was to relate it back to people that we hear from all the time. And I don't think I'm alone. I think I'm pretty typical. Well, I don't know if I'm typical, but I think I'm not that uncommon. My story is not that uncommon, really. Already I've been hearing from so many people on social media saying, my story was like your story. And that's really why I wrote it, so that people would understand, like, it's not that uncommon and you're not alone. But what happened was my teenagers, I think, were some of the most stressful years because these stresses began to stack, and they stacked quickly. So in addition to developing really early and looking much older than I was, I didn't, and it's funny now, girls change their pictures. They all sort of look that way. They're sort of used to it. We didn't have social media back then. So if you looked like that, you got this insane amount of attention for the way you looked, and not from boys, from men. And so it began to be weird. It just began to be weird. I told you in the last episode that my stepdad called me sexy bitch, and that was sort of a nickname that I had. And he thought it was hilarious. He didn't really mean that much by it. But I started to develop this code red identity crisis, if you will. So I hated the attention I got. I was really young. I was like 14 when it started. Nickname at school became drugs, and at home it was sexy bitch. And I didn't like it. But if I went out, I started to try to cover up. So I'd cover up with a sweatshirt. I'd go out with no makeup, and then I would get no attention. Or worse, people would say, "Are you okay?" Because they were used to me looking differently, right? And when that happened, I began to realize that I began to crave the attention that I hated. And that's when I began.
So you wanted it, but you didn't like it.
I didn't like it, but I needed it.
But you wanted it.
I began to need it.
Oh, that's so interesting. So just to give you context of wanting versus liking, I'm working on a new book called Happy, The Neuroscience of Feeling Good in 4 Decisions and 4 Questions. And we talk about dopamine. So that's the hit you get when somebody notices you. But so it can make you want it again, but you might not necessarily like it. So if you think of someone who smokes, mm-hmm. they want the cigarette, but they often don't like it. Mm-hmm. They're really doing it to satisfy the addiction. And mm-hmm. they hate it because they know it's causing cancer and making them smell, and it's expensive and so on. And so you wanted it because the attention fed your reward circuits. So that's what dopamine does, gives us reward. But you didn't really like it.
That was really uncomfortable.
A conflict.
Yeah, and I began to sort of hide, if you will. So it's like, this is what people expect me to look like. So I would do it because I thought that it's what was expected of me. But I almost felt like a performing monkey. It was a little weird. And I was really young. So, 14, 15, 16. And then it began to stack because someone says you should start modeling, and I started modeling, and then that was a whole ugly world at that time, especially. There's a story about a producer in the book that is just a mess. And these things began to happen quickly. And so, and I didn't have supervision. My mom would always tell me, I mean, she was doing the best she could. She worked so many hours and she's like, I'm just so happy. I'm so lucky you're such a good kid that I can trust you. I'm so lucky that I can trust you and that you don't get into trouble. And I wasn't looking for trouble. It was just there all the time.
It was finding you.
It was finding me. And so, but what happened was all of a sudden it sort of culminates into this date rape situation. The final stressor, I think, before the dam broke was a date rape. And at that point, it just came crashing down. And
what happened? This was with the guy you actually liked.
I liked him. Yeah, it was weird. And then I don't want to go into detail. It's not something I really want to talk about in detail on a podcast, but it was an ugly situation. And it again confused me because it's like, did I ask for it? Was it my fault? Was that really rape? That wasn't rape. Like I couldn't identify what it actually meant and whether it was my fault and all of a sudden I began to have these thoughts I hadn't had since I was a child. When I was really young, I actually thought I was stupid because I was behind in school. And then I figured out, I'm actually really smart once I got older and, was more cognitively developed. And I started school when I was 4. And so I was way behind.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I was way behind.
Do not start children in kindergarten when they're 4.
Yeah.
Right. If you are sort of on the cusp, like I was on the cusp, my birthday's in July.
Mine was in December.
So you were like 6 months. And for me, if I was my parents, it would have held me back another year. But it's so early. And it puts kids behind for a long time.
And then it really affects your self-esteem.
Correct.
So I used to think I was stupid when I was young. And now all of a sudden, fast forward and this date rape happens. And I, for the first time in a long time, began to wonder, maybe I am really stupid. Like maybe I'm not that smart because these things keep happening to me. It never really occurred to me that it's because I lacked supervision or I lacked guidance or I lacked, support. That didn't occur to me. What occurred to me was these things don't happen to other girls like they happen to me. And of course they do. I just didn't know it. And so all of a sudden one day I find myself over a toilet bowl and I couldn't explain it. I didn't really see it coming.
Over a toilet bowl, making yourself throw up.
Right.
And you're how old?
So I want to say I just turned 17. Yeah. And it was just a really hard time. And it sort of came crashing down and that was the outcome. Yeah. So that was my, beginning into this new struggle with this eating disorder. I wouldn't tell anybody. Well, at the time my mom found out, took me to an eating disorders clinic and they made my idea of how it should have been handled. That wasn't my idea of how it should have been handled. And it was so dramatic. I'm like, I didn't come here to be labeled. I came here to get help for my anxiety. And they didn't do that. And so I never went back. I refused to go back. And I promised my mom I wouldn't do it again if she didn't take me back. And I learned to use exercise to control my anxiety. So I thought that I'd overcome the eating disorder. I'm like, I'm strong, I'm good.
So you just shifted it from making yourself.
Oh yeah. I like extreme exercise. Like I would, 2.5 hours of just like beating myself up, even if I was sick, it didn't matter. 7 days a week. And I would get depressed if I didn't.
And exercise is a treatment for depression.
Yeah, well, it became my drug for sure. And it also was a form of purging, but I didn't know that. And so I started this struggle, I just sort of shifted it. Now, was that better for my body than what I was doing? Probably, but I never really dealt with it. So for years, I just didn't deal with it. I kept putting a Band-Aid over it. But when exercise was taken away from me, when I was diagnosed with cancer and I no longer could exercise, the eating disorder reemerged. It had been years.
The depression.
Yeah. And it had been years since I struggled with that. And then all of a sudden it was right there. And then I realized, maybe this isn't as easy to just get rid of as you think. Maybe it doesn't just go away, but I couldn't tell anybody.
And so some of the lessons in that story is if you don't deal with the trauma.
Stacked stressors, first of all, stacked stressors make a difference. It's like, I think we can deal with sometimes one thing or even two things, but when they begin to stack, there are just, if you don't have the right support system, if you don't have the right guidance, the right, situation that you're in where someone can help you, where you can talk to someone, it can quickly send you into a spiral. a downward spiral. So I think the stacked stressors are a big part of it.
And so someone listening has a teenage girl or a teenage boy that's struggling either with their eating, their behavior,
Body
their
dysmorphia.
mood. What should they do? What
Get
do you
help.
wish? Because your mother tried to get you help.
She did.
You said, I'm not going back.
So I would hope.
Because parents have that problem as well.
So I would hope that treatment has changed since then. That's my hope. I mean, I went to UCLA. You would think that that would have been like the best. They just freaked me out. I mean, they had a code blue while I was there. Some 17-year-old girl died. And I'm like, wait, what?
It was an eating disorder unit.
Yeah, but I didn't know you could die from it. And I'm hearing all of this.
10% of people with
but
anorexia.
I didn't know that. And so for someone who just thought she was going in for treatment for anxiety, it was so overwhelming. And I was so terrified by the time I came out of there that rather than wanting to get help, I felt more shamed and I felt more scared. And so I just like retreated into myself. So the first thing I would say is get help, but know where you're getting help from. I like the approach we take in the 4 circles. Like, it's not just a psychological issue. It's not just because your mother is messed up or whatever. There's a biology to it. Are your hormones out of balance? Mine were. I didn't know it. So I had thyroid. They think I had my thyroid cancer starting at about 13, but who knew? So, and they said I definitely had Hashimoto's. So there's a biology, there's a psychology. Certainly I was right for that, right? With everything going on in my family, but there's a social aspect, which that was a terrible time in my life with my social circle. And there's a spiritual component, and I was totally disconnected.
And I don't
spiritually.
think we talked about, you had switched schools.
Yeah.
Which is one of the hardest things to do. So when we come back, let's talk about that. And one of the lessons, and I've certainly learned this, is be very cautious about switching a child's social circle in junior high or high school, because it can really disrupt their development. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. In the end of mental illness, I talk about, well, what if we reimagine mental health as brain health? And this one idea changes everything. Welcome back. We were talking with author, nurse, my wife, Tana Amen, author of The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. And we have an event December 12th.
Yes.
And people can sign up for the event at tanaamen.com/event. We're really excited about it. You can also pre-order the book at relentlesscourage.com. And, I think one of the most important traumas that happened to you is when you were, in 10th grade?
Yeah, the end of 10th grade.
You switched schools.
So I had found a way to finally be happy and fit in. I became a cheerleader when I was in junior high. And I know that sounds very superficial or trivial, but when you don't fit in,
connected.
I was connected for the first time. I was such a nerd before that and did not fit in. I was the geek. I was the skinny kid that bird legs. And then all of a sudden I find this group of girls that became my sisters. And so for a couple of years, I had really yes, there was chaos at home, but I still had this group of peers and friends that I could lean on, that I could turn to. So it was okay. There was a couple years that were okay. They were good years. And then we moved, at the end of my 10th grade year. And so now not only do I look older than I am and I'm developed. And so I leave these friends that I know who sort of teased me for the way I look, but they loved me. And then when I start this new school, it wasn't the same thing. It was Mean Girls, just all over. It was bad.
That's in Huntington Beach.
Yeah. And so I withdrew even more. So that was one of the stacked stressors.
So, and I think one of the most important ones, because
I had no
from
connection.
being part of a group.
Yes.
So this is the social circle, being part of a group, fitting in, having friends, to being the pretty girl that threatens a lot of other girls, and now they hate you.
Which is, I actually got bullied. I mean, it was super weird, but I actually got bullied. So it was a strange.
And people lied about you.
Yeah. I mean, they were saying they were doing things with me. I didn't even know them. I was like, what's happening right now? It was pretty overwhelming. So I really learned how to retreat and just go into myself. And I was very lonely. I didn't even recognize what being depressed was, but I guess now looking back, I was knowing what I know now, I was depressed. I began to have anxiety, issues again. And just feeling like everybody was looking at me, everybody was talking about me all the time, not just at school. Like I started to feel paranoid almost. And so, it was a really hard time, and it was challenging. So to say the least.
Yeah. So that's one of the lessons. And that's where the date rape occurred, correct?
Well, it happened, sort of towards the end of high school.
Right. But it was in the new school, not the old school.
Yeah, but it wasn't someone from school. It wasn't someone from school, though.
And what's the next part of the story that you want to share?
I didn't recognize it at the time, which I think a lot of us don't, but I completely severed ties with my dad. So he wasn't really in my life anyways. He had disappeared when I was young. Sort of came back, but he would come and go, occasionally see me. And finally, my senior year in high school, I cut ties with him completely. Sent him a letter, told him,
But why?
Because
your dad had become a minister.
Yeah.
We really hadn't talked about
So
that.
when I was really young, he did drugs with my uncle, disappeared. I didn't see him for years. My mother would buy me gifts and tell me, that they were from him, and they weren't. And eventually I figured this out, and she stopped lying to me. But then he shows up one day with a new wife who I actually liked. And he's a Baptist minister, but he never connected with me. He never really attached to me. So him being a Baptist minister was interesting, to say the least, right? So there was no connection. He didn't pay child support. He didn't really make an effort to see me. And then when I have two half sisters later, who are 10 years younger than I am, 9 and 10 years younger than I am, he started doing drugs with them. And he now was going to leave his wife. And I just became so angry. Like all of my anger from the past, all of my pain from the past just completely surfaced. And I just lost it. And then he tells me he showed up in a silk suit and driving a Cadillac, and money he had taken from the church, apparently, I find out later. And he tells me that he's becoming a motivational speaker. He's going to leave the ministry to become a motivational speaker, and he's getting divorced. And I'm like, let me get this straight. You're going to divorce your wife, leave the church so you can become a motivational speaker and tell other people how to have a good life. I just lost it. I just kind of lost it. And so I wrote this letter and told him that being, a sperm donor did not make him my father. And I disconnected, told him, don't reach out to me ever again. And so. And
your mother really counseled you against that.
My mother, in my mind, was codependent. So part of the problems I had growing up were because my mother, she's just got a heart of gold, huge heart, but had this need to help and fix everybody to the point where it was sometimes dangerous. So when she told me that, I'm like, I don't have your problem with trying to fix everybody and help everybody and let people in my life who are dangerous. So stop supporting him. I need your support. And I got pretty angry with her, and I chewed her out for it.
Well, David, her father, becomes a very important part of the story. But I just wanted you to have that piece, because when we tell it in a bit, you'll understand why it's such a special story. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about cancer and how cancer can change your life. Welcome back. I am here with the world famous Tana Amen, author, neurosurgical ICU nurse, leader of the Brain Warriors Way movement, my best friend, my partner. So we sort of leave off at the end of high school where you kick your dad to the curb for good reason, right? I mean, it's not irrational. And then you do interesting things.
So for a while, life was just sort of vanilla, I guess you'd say, but it wasn't bad. So, but it, and it again doesn't take a shrink to figure out that, my daddy issues, because I ended up dating someone much older, but I became a little more sophisticated and traveled. And so life was just sort of moving along. Finally got back into school, realized I wasn't stupid. I was doing really well in school and started to make some plans for myself. And I was approached by a photographer on the beach who I thought was lying to me because of my past with modeling, but turns out he wasn't lying to me. And wanted me to do a test shoot with Playboy. And so at first I thought, well, of course I'm not going to do that. But then I started thinking about it, and I really wanted to go to college. My mom was very clear, we don't have the money. And so I was trying to figure out how to get money for school. And I started thinking, well, I mean, maybe I can have the last laugh if people are, I felt like, people valued me for the way I looked. Then I thought, well, I can have the last laugh. So I can, take the money, do the Playboy shoot, and use the money for college if I get accepted. Right. So I ended up doing the Playboy test shoot.
And then what happened?
Why are you looking at me like that?
I have no judgment. I think for most guys I was listening to Dennis Prager's book on happiness. And he talks about this one guy who he was 40 and never connected with a woman because what he wanted was a playmate who studied the Torah. And I was, when I listened to that, it's like, well, I have a playmate who studies medicine and loves
they were never
brain health.
published. It was never published. I never.
Well, let's finish the story. But you asked me why I was smiling because I have.
Were we doing this on the air for real?
Yeah.
This is really uncomfortable. So.
And your mom was sort of against you doing this.
She wasn't against it because of me being in Playboy. She wasn't approved by any stretch. She was against it because her visions told her that I was supposed to or going to marry someone important one day and it might interfere. Yeah. And I'm like, you're out of your mind. I don't care about men anymore. I'm done with them. I'm tired of it. I'm not waiting for anyone to take care of me, doing it myself. So I was a little bitter. Yeah.
All right. So you do the shoot.
I did the test shoot.
You did the test shoot, and they decided to make you a playmate.
So, that's where things get wonky, because I do the test shoot and there's a few months you wait in between before they call you back and schedule you. It takes a while. So during that time, I started to feel weirder and weirder. Like I started to get shaky. I was losing weight for no reason. And so I go to the doctor and he's like, you need to go get tested. There's something wrong with your thyroid. And you had this big lump in my throat. And so I go to the doctor and sure enough, I have thyroid cancer. So in this in-between time, I find out I have thyroid cancer, which is just mind-boggling to me. First of all, I'm like, I don't even know what thyroid cancer is. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm like I look super fit. I look super healthy, sort of have my life going the direction I want it to go now, right? I'm doing well in school, have a job, going to get this money, I think. And so things are moving the right direction. But I'm told now I have thyroid cancer. 2 weeks later, I get a call from Playboy and they're like, yeah, we're going to schedule you. And I'm like, what? I couldn't even process it. And so the doctor, when I found out I had thyroid cancer, he's like, well, the good news is you have a slow growing form of cancer. It's not going to kill you. It's not terminal. And so as soon as he said that, I'm like, oh, good. I'm putting it on hold. I got to go do this Playboy shoot. But when they did more tests, he's like, yeah, that's not a good idea. It's metastasized. It's not just isolated in your thyroid. You cannot wait. Nothing else matters right now. And so I was just sort of mind blown. I was numb. I didn't understand it. I didn't believe it. But I told them, what do you say to, a Playboy editor when they call you and they say, we're going to book you to be Playmate? You're like, well, I have cancer. I mean, what? I have to put off doing this shoot to exploit my body because I have cancer? Like, it just didn't, like, it wasn't registering. And so it was just an awkward conversation. And she's like, well, call us back and we'll see if we can still work you in. I don't even know. I thought she was just saying that to me. So I go through this whole situation with the thyroid cancer. And initially I don't feel well, but I'm starting to come back okay. I'm starting to recover, but I'm not feeling great. And then all of a sudden they call again and they're like, we want to actually test you again. She said, we're going to book you. Like, are you okay? I'm like, well, actually I'm done with the surgery, but I've gained weight. Like, I don't think you're going to want to book me. I'm like, I've gained 10 pounds. And she's like, no, come in. We'll test you again. I went in and did another test and they accepted me. And I find out I have cancer again.
Then it came back.
It came back. I had to go through another treatment. And so it was at that point that literally life just unraveled. And I not only physically, just from the actual thyroid cancer itself and being low on thyroid, treatment back then was very different than it is now. So treatment for thyroid cancer back then, you had to actually have no thyroid in your system. They couldn't just give you a shot like they do now, then give you the radiation. It was like 6 weeks of feeling miserable before you got the pill, the radiation. So I felt miserable. I didn't understand that was actually part of my depression was actually thyroid related. No one really explained that to me. And I went into this deep depression. I had to quit school. I had to quit my job, lost the Playboy thing, filed for bankruptcy. And oh, by the way, while I'm on my way, because you have to stay isolated during the treatment, I find out the day I take the pill, so I have to be around nobody for a week, that my mom has to have brain surgery. And I just lost it. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
When we come back, we're going to talk about depression. Stay with us. At Amen Clinics, we're creating a revolution in psychiatry. All other medical specialists look at the organ they treat before they treat it, but most psychiatrists never look and end up guessing based on whatever symptoms you tell them. But how do you know unless you look? Brain SPECT imaging gives us a new way to look at your brain, to understand and treat your symptoms so you can ultimately know what is going on and feel better. Welcome back. So you can totally see why I married her.
Feeling a little exposed at the moment.
Smart and beautiful, adventurous, but suffer.
Yeah. No, I went into a wicked depression after that. So now, I think in the last episode we left off with the second treatment for thyroid cancer. And I went into just a wicked depression.
And that your mom had to have
my mom had brain surgery. So now not only did I not have a support system, but my fear over losing my mom, like that fear when I was a child, like came back. It was almost like the panic attacks came back. And I just felt crippled with, anxiety and depression. And I couldn't get out of bed. And I started wanting to die. And it was pretty crazy. So
how else did it impact you?
Depression is not like anything else. And I don't want to minimize cancer for people, because I know people who suffer horrifically with cancer. My cancer was a little different than most people's. I knew I wasn't going to die from it. I just wanted to die from it because I felt so miserable. So for some people, they really, it's really terrible. For me, depression was worse. It was the one thing I can actually say was worse than finding out I had cancer, was the depression. I just could not get away from the feeling. I couldn't crawl out of my skin. The world was black. There was no hope. I was just completely hopeless. I quit my job, quit school. My mom had brain surgery, couldn't pay my medical bills, lost, whatever hope I had for this future, getting a little bit of money to get ahead. And I ended up filing for bankruptcy. And it was like, why am I on the planet? Why am I breathing? Like, it didn't make sense. And I didn't have I didn't have any spiritual connections in my life at the time, really. I was kind of bankrupt in that department. So I didn't have a bigger sense of meaning and purpose.
And so whose idea was it for you to see a psychiatrist?
Mine, actually. So I was walking, my mom was, and that was the other thing. Please don't do this to people who are depressed. Please, please, please. If you are listening to this, don't do this to people who are depressed. But my mom didn't really understand what I was going through. She was so relieved that I wasn't going to die. She was so relieved that she didn't die from what she had to go through with her brain surgery, that she didn't understand why I wasn't grateful. And she was getting annoyed with me for not snapping out of it. And so she's like, I'm tired of you laying around. She sort of kicked my butt. You're getting out of the house today. She was getting annoyed with me. So she drags me along to go shopping, and I see this book, Listening to Prozac or something like that. And it was at a secondhand bookstore. And I'm like, it said something about depression on the title or on the subtitle. And I'm like, what? Maybe there's hope. Like I didn't think there was any hope. I didn't know that there was medication for depression at the time. I didn't know anything I didn't even know what was wrong with me. So, but when I saw that title, all of a sudden I read something about darkness, coming out of the darkness. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I read this and I instantly knew I needed Prozac. Like I knew I needed Prozac. Self-diagnosis, I was sure of it. No one was going to talk me out of it. So I call, to make an appointment with a psychiatrist, and it was pretty expensive and I didn't have insurance. I filed for bankruptcy. So I start calling around and I find, basically a resident psychiatrist who would see me. And I get in and I am not even letting him talk, which you guys, let me look at you. You just sort of like listen anyways. But so I tell him, I'm like, I know I'm not going to sit here for years and bang my head up against a wall. I know what's wrong with me. I know what I need. I need a prescription for Prozac. Like I was very clear. And he wasn't budging. He wasn't saying anything. He just kept staring at me. So I start word vomiting everything going on in my, life, because I realize he's not going to give me a prescription unless I sound screwed up enough. So I made it sound screwed up enough, which wasn't very hard to do.
Not hard.
No, not hard. So he gives me this prescription for Prozac. And within a few days, I'm like, oh, I don't want to die. This is good. It's progress. I don't want to die. So this is good. But all of a sudden I don't even know the feeling because there wasn't much feeling. Like over time, I don't want to die, but I don't really care about much. I just didn't really care about much. And I'd always been very anxious. So even though I didn't make always good decisions, I made some, not necessarily smart decisions, but I was anxious about making decisions. I was cautious. Now I was wildly impulsive. Like I was dangerously impulsive. I just suddenly became dangerously impulsive.
Do you want to share?
Well, it's in the book. It was a pretty wild ride for a few months. It was like 6 to 8 months of pretty wild ride. So,
and then you actually go back to the doctor and you go,
I told him something's not right. I don't think this is working. I don't feel right. I don't feel like myself. I'm not cautious about making decisions. I don't care about anything. He actually told me that I needed to increase my dose. He said, well, you don't want to die, and that's a good sign. I think we need to increase your dose. He doubled my dose. And then he doubled it again. And I sort of argued with him, but then I'm thinking, well, what do I know? Like I should have listened to myself, but I didn't listen to myself. And I thought, well, he's the doctor. Like some Doogie Howser, I should have listened to myself and gotten a second opinion. But I didn't. And so So
on the medication, which was not right for your brain, that you end up in Costa Rica.
On a dare.
The whole story people can read about in the book. But
I dated some crazy people. I mean, I was crazy. I was acting crazy. So.
And what we've learned, so if you have no thyroid, so from a psychiatric standpoint, you have a family history of depression. You grow up in stress, chaos, unpredictability, and you have no thyroid. So, trauma on a genetic foundation of vulnerability to depression. And you assume depression's one thing. So I need Prozac, which is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which increases the availability of serotonin.
At the time, it was a very popular drug.
Yes. Listening to Prozac was a monster bestseller by Peter Kramer. And But what Prozac does is it calms down the circuits in your brain.
It wasn't until I had been telling people for years after I finally took myself off the drug, I had been telling people for years that Prozac made me act crazy, not like myself. It changed my personality. No one really acknowledged that. It wasn't until I met you and saw my scan. And you said to me, did you ever take an antidepressant? And I told you yes. And you said, well, I hope it wasn't Prozac. I was like, why? You're like, because that's not what I would have prescribed for you because you have sleepy frontal lobes. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. Just explained my whole life.
Yeah. But Wellbutrin, which stimulates your frontal lobes, has been incredibly helpful for you. So it's not a bad idea to look at your brain before you go about changing it. That's what we try to do at Amen Clinics. And I think, after we met, you got scanned, you're like, oh, well, this sort of makes sense because you're bright and you're logical. And
I'm a neurosurgical ICU nurse, so technology
you?
makes sense to me.
So why wouldn't you look?
And so that's why I often say, first of all, don't do what I did. Don't go off of it cold turkey. Please don't do that. Get help and go off of it, with the help of a trained, skilled professional. But it's really important. We are not anti-medicine. We are just against the indiscriminate use of it. That's why I often say that. That's why I'm such an advocate for people understanding what medicine does, being on the right medicine. So, because it can literally affect your life in ways you don't want to be affected. My life was literally like some crazy, cross between Carrie and 9.5 weeks. It was just insane when I was on Prozac. So you don't want to find yourself in that position, and you don't have to. So if you have the right help.
And also, I think part of getting well for you is you got connected to Chrissy, so a mentor.
Huge part of it. So a lot of things happened.
Then you started going to church.
So the really exciting thing is, just like the negative stressors can stack, positive stressors, not stressors, positive events can stack as well. And so all of a sudden, I really started praying like something's got to happen. And I didn't really know if I believed in God, because I'm like, if there's a God, he doesn't love me. When I was depressed, I was like, I'm not on the top of his list. So I sort of had disconnected, also because of my dad. My struggles with my dad led me to sort of disconnect from faith. But all of a sudden, like one positive thing happened, it attracted another positive thing. And then these positive stress or events began to stack. And like life changed really fast. Like it wasn't slow. It happened fast. So it wasn't overnight, but all of a sudden good things began happening really quickly. And it, of course, was with the help of someone very special in my life, a mentor, a guide.
Mentors are so important.
But I reconnected with my spirituality. So you can find Relentless Courage of a Scared Child at relentlesscourage.com. So I'm feeling a little exposed, but if it helps anybody to understand you are not alone.
Well, compared to Playboy, this is like nothing.
You just had to go there. You just had to go there.
We also have an event, December 12th, Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, Trauma, and Grief. You can sign up. It's free at tanaamen.com/event. Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com, or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.